Let's face it, in today's day and age, we've all had our own inner demons, some more prominent than others, and how we deal with those demons comes in different ways, some healthier than others. For me, when I had my own spell of depression, I retreated into the worlds of video games. Maybe that's not the healthiest way of dealing with my depressive states, especially when you lose a loved one, but I find it as a means of not wanting to be destructive by immersing myself into games that can have a message to them. Whether they be positive or negative, I can learn from them, grow from them, and relate to the characters that deal with it. I've done this with a number of games. Persona 4, Night in the Woods, Yakuza 0, Silent Hill, Metal Gear Solid 2, diving myself into some various narratives and gameplay mechanics just so I could take my mind off these sorts of emotions that practically shut me down, really got me to get to where I am nowadays. Again, it's probably not the healthiest thing to do, but hey, I don't mind being open with you guys about this. It saves me a ton of money on a therapist.
I spit on you!
Even games that I've openly mocked and hated have aspects of them that I can appreciate to some degree. Sure, I may hate them, but I can still find something to take out of them. What I'm getting at is that games are important to me. Not only do they help me get through hard times, but they also help shape my own personal moral compass. And hey, I like to think I'm at least somewhat of a halfway decent person. Although, not if you ask some people who are fans of works I've created. But today I want to take some time to actually be positive for once in my life and talk about a game that I really do relate to, as it's a good representation for stuff like depression and anxiety. To make it clear, I'm not talking about specific disorders. I'm more or less referring to emotional stresses like anxiety, distrust. You get the idea. I'm sure people are really going to take this video well. A disclaimer, it should be stated that I'm not a mental health doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not someone who you should go to for advice with this sort of stuff. I'm just a guy who loves games and has his own issues in life. So, what is this game? Yeah, if you didn't have any actual credibility before Kamen, you sure as hell don't have any now! So, hear me out. Back in the early 2000s, Capcom was going through some oddities. The first Resident Evil movie and its sequel had come out, much to the chagrin of Resident Evil fans.
My name is Alice.
Dead Rising's first game had released, and if you know anything about this channel, you know where I stand on that. Meanwhile, titles like Devil May Cry and Phoenix Wright came into being as well, and they were highly successful. Hell, it's even recently that those two game titles came back strong. But, as the title would suggest, what about the famous Blue Bomber, one of Capcom's greatest, if not most iconic characters? Well, Mega Man was kinda going through an identity crisis back in the 2000s. Not saying the entire thing was bad, but...
Destroy! Destroy! Destroy!
It had its fair share of drops in quality. Still, if you ask me, they were more good than bad. What with the inclusion of the Mega Man X games, the Zero games, the ZX games, and the Battle Network games, they all have their highs and lows, but to put it simply, there was a lot of Mega Man during the early 2000s. Hell, apparently Mega Man Battle Network is still being played online with a competitive scene going on, which is pretty awesome. But the game we're focusing on is Mega Man Starforce, a sort of continuation to the Battle Network games, but hard to really tell since it's supposed to take place in the far-off future in that timeline. However, we're getting ahead of ourselves. What exactly is Mega Man Starforce? Geo Stellar is a young man in the year 2020-0X who, needless to say, has some issues. He's not very sociable, has a deep depression going on, refuses to go to school, and prefers to spend his time looking at the sky at a location called Vista Point.
Vista way.
Vista Point. The reason for this is that 3 years prior to this game's story, his father, Kelvin Stellar, a scientist and astronaut, was lost in space when the space station Peace exploded. Which is what caused Geo to stop going to school. Destroying peace. Get it? It's metaphorical! Naturally, when you're that young and you lose a parent at that age, it can be a very harrowing experience, especially if you're close to that parent. So when such a big aspect of your life, especially when you're that young, disappears, it's natural to want to seclude yourself and distance yourself from other people, especially to those who are reaching out to you. Not even Geo's mother and Mr. Boreal,
Aurora Boreal!
friend of Geo's father, are enough to pull him out of his funk, even giving Geo a memento of his father, a pair of glasses called a visualizer that allow Geo to see EM waves. They're a form of electromagnetic waves the Starforce series hinges on for its physics. After that, Geo goes to his usual hangout spot, where an alien named Omegasis drops from the sky, knowing Geo's name, and after merging into Megaman, Omegasis hints that he knows Geo's father. But the rub is he won't tell him, mainly because the alien wants to basically live rent-free in Geo's electronics. Lazy bum syndrome at its finest. Now that we've got the basic premise, I'm going to be upfront. You're not going to be getting a super deep dive. That's the point of a Mega Man game. Even the more narrative-driven ones is to have gameplay be first and foremost. And frankly, it's the same here for Starforce. If you know anything about the Mega Man Battle Network series, it's a similar system to that, only instead of there being a 3x3 grid for both the player and viruses, there's a 3x1 grid for Mega Man to use, and you need to be able to move with enemy attacks, lock onto them, know when to use your shield, and battle cards. It's fun, but we're more focusing on the story for this one. Now, at this point, I do want to talk about Omegasis and Geo's relationship, but before I dive into that and how I feel it works as a means of helping with depression, I want to talk about the main bosses of the game and how they each have issues of their own that need to be discussed, and how they lead into the main prospect of this game.
Get ready for the next battle.
So, let's start with the concept of the bosses themselves. The F-Emians are similar to that of Omegasis, i.e. they're beings made up of EM waves that can combine with humans in order to create a more powerful being. The only difference is that the F-Emians tend to take over the humans they possess through negative emotions and their weaknesses. Thing is, the humans need to let them into their hearts in order to control them. Think of it akin to A Deal with the Devil, where people often seek a means of trying to fix their lives even if they need to do some dastardly deeds. What exactly does this mean for the humans in the game who are affected by the F-Emians? Well, I'll go through a few of the bosses, since the last boss is kind of a twist. Then again, one of the weaknesses of these games is that you can tell who's an important character because they have a unique character sprite. So let's start with the first of the humans, Bud Bison. Time for some more context. Near the start of the game, there's a group of 3 characters, Luna Plants, Bud Bison, and the nerd, Zack Temple, who are attempting to get Geo back into school. After all, Luna is the class president, and with Geo being in their class and not showing up, it's kind of an issue for attendance and her record. Luna believes that if she can get Geo back into the school, then that'd be a good mark for her. Look, it's a kid's game, okay? After a few attempts to get Geo back into school having failed, the group confront Geo again in front of his house, with Bud getting a bit more physical in this altercation. However, due to the fact that Omegasis is able to...
You got knocked the fuck out, man!
Because Omegasis is in Geo's transer, he's basically able to manipulate Geo's arm into attacking Bud. Now here's the thing, the only thing that Bud has going for him is his size. He's not good at school, and Zack and Luna are practically his only friends. So when Luna threatens to cut ties with Bud, that kind of sends the kid into a bit of a small depression. By the way, that's the wiki's words, not mine. It's at this point when another alien creature, the F-Emian Taurus, appears before Bud and offers him power in order to fix his problems. And as you would imagine... it backfires on him, turning Bud into Taurus fire, and frankly when this happens... not gonna lie, that's kinda priceless. The kid punches ya, and you resort to controlling a truck to run him over. So it's up to Geo to get into the truck, that also has Luna and Zack in it, and stop Taurus fire. The next boss involves a character named Tom Dubious, a man who actually managed to make a personal flying machine. My, what a graceful manner of transportation. Yeah. Surely no one will get sick from that motion. But regardless, when you actually talk to the guy, he comes off as fidgety and is really worried about his invention. Which, when you consider something as big as an invention that would allow personal flight, it's not so far-fetched to think that he'd want to keep it secret. Cut to a tour that Geo happens to be a part of, along with the 3 other kids at the lab not only Mr. Boreal works at, but so does Tom. And thanks to a misunderstanding, Tom believes that Mr. Boreal is taking credit for his flight machine, and allows the Femian Cygnus to take him over, becoming Cygnus Wing, with his evil plan to make people dance to death. Yeah, again, kids' game! To explain something, this kind of shows a form of anxiety born from mistrust. For context's sake, Tom had another invention that he created that was stolen from him, who he considered his friend. And recently, Mr. Boreal wanted to become friends with Tom, so in Tom's eyes, the same thing happened again, and that allowed Cygnus to take him over. Third boss involves a popular singer, Sonia Strum, who's attempting to escape from her rather creepy manager.
I need an adult.
I am an adult.
Not so much creepy as in, show me where he touched ya, more like he's an overly greedy person who's a bit too frantic. So we decide to help Sonia Strum get away from the guy. While she loves to sing, she's basically lost her passion because of how much it's being used for monetary gain. Something I can relate to, that when you put your heart and soul into something but are constantly being forced to do that sort of thing, it can be draining on one's creativity. Even more so if that thing you had a passion for is tied to someone you cared about, like a mother who basically urged you to go to a singing competition. Yeah, Sonia's mother died. And having the connection and last thing that reminds her of her mother being beaten to the ground is what's causing her to not continue her career. And thanks to her manager finding her and forcing her to continue onwards, that amount of stress is enough for... Well, I think you get the idea at this point. The Femian Lyra pops up and offers Sonia a chance to get her freedom. There's also a bit of a love setup between Sonia and Geo, but we'll talk about that if I ever continue talking about this series. It's at this point that I think I need to stop and point out the main motif thus far with these three characters. They aren't bad people, but people who are basically dealing with various forms of anxiety. Bud's dealing with the possibility of losing the only thing he's got going for him as well as his friends. Tom's got his trust issues, and from his point of view, the moment he opens himself up again, his trust is violated. And Sonia's only remaining memento of her dead mother is being used by a greedy son of a bitch. Throw in the fact that two of these characters are still kids, this is heavy stuff. And how I view the Femians, I consider to be a representation of negative emotions. Think about it for a second. Whenever a person is going through some very tough and personal situations, it's easy for negative emotions and thoughts to slowly creep in. Tom is a very good example of this, because before he actually accepted Cygnus into his heart, he still gave Mr. Boreal a chance to earn his trust. It wasn't until Tom thought his trust was broken that he actually allowed Cygnus into his heart. But before then, Cygnus had actually put the thoughts of how Mr. Boreal would betray him in Tom's head. Those kinds of thoughts will actually float around in a person's head, and even though we may not like to admit it, those thoughts will actively influence us, much like how Femians will influence their human hosts. Now, maybe I'm doing a bit of stretching, but it's at least an interesting concept and theme, and it's one I feel that the game is subtly pushing. Back to the bosses, we actually have an interesting one coming up. A teacher named Mr. Shepard, a guy who has a lot of kids on his own, but has his own moral codes. You see, in the future, there's a device that actually uses EM waves to transmit information into kids' brains. Look, I know there's a lot of people who accuse schools of being brainwashing institutions nowadays, but I don't think this is what those people mean. But Mr. Shepard is a teacher who believes that there's more to schooling than just studying facts, and believes that schools are just teaching their students how to study. Geez, sounds like the guy's got the right idea. But unfortunately, much like our real school system, grades are somewhat actually what matter. Not the students actually learning anything useful. And Mr. Shepard's boss isn't all that thrilled that his class isn't doing all that well in the other classes that are using this wave. And if he doesn't use it, then Mr. Shepard is going to be fired. Cue in the Femian who's taking advantage of this stressful situation. You've got a school that is now brainwashing kids with psychedelic waves of energy being poured into their brains! The last boss I want to talk about without spoiling everything about this game is Luna. The same Luna who is the class president who is pushing to get Geo into the school. Her pressure is from her parents. They don't think she's really succeeding at her potential at her current school, and plan on removing her without even getting her input on it. Now, while this sounds pretty mundane, you need to consider that not only Luna is a kid, but is essentially being told that the only friends she's really had are going to be gone. And her parents, who I may tell you are very busy business people, so Luna is usually on her own. And these two are basically, and in Luna's own words, treating her like a doll. She has no actual control of her life and everything she does. When you're a kid, you really don't have a lot of freedoms. And whatever little freedom you do have can be taken away from you, and it can be stress-inducing. Insert the invading Ephemian, and now you have snakes.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Also, I know Japan has this thing going on, but damn, they kind of really drastically changed Luna's figure. What the frig? She's a kid, damn it!
That's disgusting!
Let's take a few steps back and talk about these bosses and the outcomes. Now, as a game, you fight these bosses and defeat them. And when you defeat Taurus Fire, that seems pretty standard. You beat the bowl, Bud returns to normal, with Luna and her lackeys becoming better friends after realizing that Bud was insecure about what Luna said. However, when it comes to Tom, this is when it gets really interesting. After defeating Cygnus Wing, Mr. Boreal confronts Tom, telling him they didn't steal Tom's invention. But as you would imagine, Tom doesn't trust Mr. Boreal. Now for a little context, the group's inside a space simulator, and that's why everyone's wearing a spacesuit, because there's no air within the room. And that's important because we get this line. Also, if you're just listening to this video, I suggest you stop what you're doing and watch for about 2 minutes. There's no voice acting in this game, and I'm too cheap to hire voice actors, so... It's at this point in the game that I really began to take notice of the deeper themes that were going on within the rather simplistic writing. We live in a time of isolated social systems. Most of us nowadays talk through a screen to each other, and trust with people is something that can't really be built continuously between someone whose face can't be seen when you're talking to them. There is a distance. And trust in any relationship, whether it be friends, family, or those we love, is something that we need in order to live happily. Tom's trust was violated in a big way in his past, and just when he thought he could trust again, he believes he was betrayed. It's not uncommon for people to think this way. Hell, I've thought this way when I've had people I had considered friends for years stab me in the back and treated me like dirt when I tried to talk to them. But sometimes, a single act of trust can go a long way. It's not uncommon for those with trust issues to view anyone with suspicion, and it's hard for people to open themselves up to others. Still, when someone shows a real act of kindness to you, to show that they do believe in you and are willing to trust you, that hand that extends to you can really change your life. Maybe I'm reading a bit too much into this, but this scene is probably one of my favorites in game stories. The fact that Mr. Boreal was willing to risk his life in order to prove that his feelings of friendship were legit, I find that to be beautiful. Let's continue with Sonia, aka Harp Note. After you defeat her, we get this scene. Again, I don't have this voice, so please watch for a minute or so. This is a common thing to do when you want to help someone, relating with your own personal experiences. Sonia lost her mother, and Geo lost his father, and by having a relatable experience, you can reach out to help another. This is something that I myself experienced too. After I lost my father, I felt like crap. I lost someone important to me, and when I was asked to just continue on with my life, I felt that was completely insensitive. It wasn't until those who had also experienced loss reached out to me to tell me that I wasn't alone, and I began to see that I shouldn't let this loss keep me chained down. We have the memories of our loved ones who are gone in our hearts, and with more people who are willing to share their own experiences, we can grow. For Mr. Shepard, whose morals and survivability were balanced against each other, well, here's a bit of a different outcome. Mr. Shepard had to choose to either provide for his family or to continue to help his students learn the right way. Sometimes these kinds of choices happen in life, and you'll be forced to make a decision that will hurt you in some way, and sometimes it'll be inevitable. A lose-lose situation. But when you have people backing you up, people believing in you, even if this decision hurts you, you'll be able to recover, so long as you believe in your convictions, and have those whom you have helped in the past back you up, you'll be able to get right back up. A single act of kindness can lead to great things. Heck, even after Mr. Shepard resigned from being a teacher, his students still got together to get him back as a teacher. Next up, Luna Platts. And there's something I actually need to point out. During this story, Luna's been kind of a central character in almost all the incidents involving the FMians. Hell, at one point in the story, Geo outright admits that if it wasn't for Luna, he probably would have quit being Megaman. And funnily enough, Luna has developed feelings for Megaman after being saved by him. So when you get Luna turning into Queen Ophelia and you defeat her, turns out the dork was the dashing young hero all along! But to be serious, sometimes when we're in pain or go through a rough time, we'll lash out at those we do care about. Sometimes it'll be against those who have wronged us or people we considered loved ones. We do and say things that can hurt others when we ourselves are in pain. And when we do that, we'll sever those bonds that we have. And sometimes they'll be gone. In the heat of emotion, we'll do and say things we wouldn't normally. Now, I'm not saying that when people do this, you have to sit there and take it. But you shouldn't just leave people like this, especially if you know for a fact that this isn't how they normally act. Being there for people who go through stressful times and providing support is pretty much the best thing you can do for them. With this, there's something I need to point out about this game and its themes, and that's bonds. The game has a thing called brothermans. It's essentially making yourself friends with people to a point where you can share your deepest secrets with each other. And that's something that people need to remember, that we're not alone. We have people who care about us, who love us, and want to make sure that we don't do anything that we'll regret. And while it's not a magical cure-all, this isn't any Steven Universe hug. This is just to know that so long as you've got people with you that you care about, you'll never be truly alone, and you'll have those who will listen and help you when they can. I think it's time we talked about Geo and Omega Sis themselves. I think Geo is a good representation of depression, and Omega Sis represents a good way of helping someone who is depressive. And it's at this point I need to remind you guys I'm not a doctor, that I'm going off my own experiences with depression, and just because this worked for me doesn't mean it'll work for you or anyone else. I just want to cover one of the many ways that you can help with someone who has depression. Let's consider the first time Geo and Omega Sis met. Yes, part of the reason they merged together was a mutual benefit to stop a train from going nuts. Yeah, kids game. But that's when Omega Sis offers something to Geo. Information about his father. It was hinted at that Omega Sis knew more because he actually knew Geo's name and that he heard it from a human he met in space. Basically, Omega Sis gave Geo some hope, learning that this alien knows something about his father. It just happens that Omega Sis tends to be a weird character at times. Throughout the story, Omega Sis will often bait the information in front of Geo, all the while Omega Sis uses it to have Geo take him outside his room and see different things and try different things, such as helping people, exploring the world outside his town, and pushing Geo to do other things. And this is why I think the game tackles depression in an interesting way. Geo kept pushing himself to be alone. He didn't want to go back to school, he ran away from people his own age, and by his own words, he pushed people away from getting close because he didn't want to feel the sting of losing someone. But Omega Sis? He's Geo's companion. Depression makes it difficult for a person to connect on a deep emotional level with anyone, even the people they love the most. It's also common for depressed people to say hurtful things and lash out in anger. It's a commonality in Geo's behavior throughout the entire game. But with Omega Sis having information, he gives Geo some hope, and with that small positive thought, Omega Sis subtly pushes Geo into doing more positive things. He doesn't force Geo to do things, but slowly has Geo become more open. When you're suffering from depression, just thinking about doing the things that may help you to feel better can seem exhausting or impossible to put into action, but patience is key here. As with Omega Sis' curiosity pushing, and pulling in some cases, to get Geo to do different things other than mope around, Geo slowly opens up. Omega Sis doesn't fix Geo's depression. I want to stress that. While you can offer love and support, ultimately recovery is in the hands of the depressed person. As much as we may want to, you can't rescue someone from depression or fix the problem for them, but you can offer your support and guidance, as well as being fully open-minded to someone. Doesn't hurt that Omega Sis helps Geo a lot with his ability to wave change, even saving him from being run over from a truck. It also helps that Geo is a good person deep down. When Omega Sis wants to stop the truck holding Luna and Zack with his blaster, Geo steps up and comes with an alternate solution because that would hurt them. If anything, I'd say that Omega Sis instills a form of determination and hope within Geo. And while it doesn't happen overnight, over the course of the game you can see that Geo slowly breaks free from his shackles, and the two characters grow closer as friends. People are so weak. They think they can't fill the void in their hearts by themselves. Everyone needs to feel they fit in somewhere. There are even times when Omega Sis will actually be understanding of Geo's position, but will question his actions. Like when Mr. Boreal invites him to his lab. Granted, you shouldn't say you're pitiful to a depressed person, but Omegasis does say that if Geo doesn't want to go, he shouldn't. That's the key point here. And if Geo is going, then he's got a little more oomph to go on. Really, the idea here is that Geo's got a companion with him, someone who actively does help him and lends him support when he needs it, and even gets Geo to open up to others as a result. And that's what you should do. Be a friend. It's something that Geo learns. At a later point in the story, after an event where I don't want to spoil, since, well, whatever, Geo feels betrayed and regresses into his depression, pushing everyone he's become friends with away, including Omegasis. Now, I'm not saying Omegasis is in the right for what he said here, but people will butt heads with each other, and will say things that are hurtful to each other. It's, simply put, only natural. But bonds are stronger than that, and even though people can push others away with hurtful words, they can remain strong, and Omegasis did leave an impact on Geo, to the point where Geo goes to find Omegasis. Geo's depression stemmed from his loneliness, and how he didn't want to face the pain of losing someone again, but after spending time with those who legit cared about him, he came to the conclusion that it's better to be with those who care about you than to push them away. You gotta enjoy the time you have with them. And while loss can hurt, by being this way, it only leads to more loss. Granted, this is one interpretation, and what happens here is obviously a work of fiction, but the idea stuck with me. And that I had a similar experience helped as well. When my father passed away, I was lonely, and didn't want to face anyone really. But I had friends and those who cared about me who pushed me into doing more, and helped me realize that while loss is something that'll happen, it doesn't negate the good that comes from those I've bonded with. Loss and depression do hit, and they can hit hard, but you're not alone. And sometimes, being a friend is what can really make the difference for someone you care about. But hey, that's just me probably reading too much into this game. It's a fun game series with 3 chapters into the main series with a cancelled 4th game, and I think that's a shame because throughout the rest of the series we get more into the friendship of Geo and Omegasis. And fun little fact, with each additional sequel, Geo's facial sprite gets more cheery. I don't know, I really just like the series and want to talk about a subject that's a bit deeper, but what do you guys think? If this video does well enough, I might cover the next couple games, but know that I recommend these games. They're good. Get them. Thanks for watching!